Hey there, this is Katie from Katie and the Squid, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make these minimalist jewelry trays out of polymer clay. For all these trays, I'm starting with some white polymer clay. The brand that I'm using in the video is Fimo Soft, but you can use whatever brand you'd like. For this first tray, I'm just rolling out my polymer clay, and if I come across any air bubbles, I pop them with an X-Acto knife and just keep rolling it out until it's nice and even. I like this roller because it has guides on it to keep the whole thing at an even depth. Once it's nice and even, I grab a large circle cutter and I cut out a circle. If you don't have a circle cutter, you can easily trace something with an X-Acto knife or something like that. And then as carefully as I can, I transfer my circle to this bowl. Now you want to make sure that you're using a bowl that is oven safe, which this one is, and then I'm just trying to press out as much of the air bubbles as I can and maintain that nice circular shape. And then I grab a silicone tool and I'm just trying to refine all the edges here. And then with that silicone tool, I'm just pushing in the edges to form the petals of the flower. If you don't have a silicone tool, you could probably do this with a toothpick. And then when I'm happy with the way that it looks, I'm just going to set this aside to make the middle of the flower. So here I have some more polymer clay, which is kind of like this brownish yellow color. I couldn't tell you exactly what brand or what color this is. I just mixed it with some scraps that I had laying around. Most likely it's probably Sculpey Primo. That's all I really know. So then I rolled this out a little bit thinner than the first piece. You can see I took off those thicker guides on my roller, and then I grabbed a smaller cutter and I cut out a smaller circle. As carefully as I could, I transferred the smaller circle and put it as close to the middle of my white flower as I could. It doesn't have to be perfect. I kind of like that it's not perfect. It looks a little bit more organic, and I'm happy that it's not exactly in the middle. And then I grabbed my dotting tool and I just started adding a bunch of texture to the middle of the flower. If you don't have a dotting tool, I imagine the end of a paintbrush or something would work. So I just kept adding a bunch of dots like this until the whole thing was covered. And it took a while, but the results were worth it. At this point it was looking really good, but I wanted to add just a little bit more detail. So what I did is I took my silicone tool again and I brought down the lines from where I added those indents to the edge, and I brought them all the way down to the center of the flower, and then I added more lines coming out from the center of the flower just to give a little bit more detail and dimension. So white clay can be super finicky. Even though I had a nice clean surface, I still ended up with like little hairs. You know, when you use white polymer clay, you get those hairs or fuzzies or something. So here I have some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip, and I just use that to get any of those imperfections out of the clay. And so I just went over the whole thing and got anything that I could see out. Once it was nice and clean, it was ready to bake, so I threw this in the oven following the instructions on the package, and I'll show you how I finish it towards the end of the video. For my next tray, I wanted to add some speckles to the clay. So here I have my white clay, and then in this dish I have some coffee grounds. And the easiest way to add the coffee grounds to the clay without making a mess, I found, is to just rip off a little piece, dip it in the coffee, and then stick it back in my piece of clay. I kept doing that and mixing it in until I felt like there was enough speckles in the clay. And then I rolled it out just like I did the first piece of clay. Once it was all rolled out, I transferred this onto my baking sheet before cutting. Then I gave it another roll to make sure that it was nice and flat, and I grabbed my cookie cutter again and cut out a nice circle. And then I took the leftover clay and I rolled it out into a nice even snake. You want to make sure that it's nice and even because this is going to be the lip that goes around the tray. I made it long enough so it was slightly smaller than the circumference of the circle. I'm going to roll it out flatter so it will fit all the way around once I make it flat. And then I added this piece around the circumference of the circle. I tried to keep it as even as I could, and I made sure to kind of press it up against the edge so that it adheres when it bakes. And then that little overlap I'll just cut off, and then I'll use some of my tools to kind of get rid of that seam as best as I can. It took a little bit of finessing, but I did finally get it to where it looked nice, and then it was ready to go in the oven. Again, I just followed the instructions that were on the package, and by the way, it does not smell like coffee afterwards. And now for this last tray, I wanted to play with some texture, so I rolled it out just like I did the other trays, and then I grabbed this stencil that I had. I placed it over the slab, and then I used my roller to push it into it, and it left this beautiful texture in it, which ended up looking like a soccer ball afterwards, but I still like it. And then I used my cutter to cut out a nice even circle. Again, as carefully as I could, I transferred the circle to my bowl, trying to maintain that circle shape as best as I could. I'm also using my silicone tool again to try and refine those edges. You don't really have to worry about this too much because you can sand it in the end if you really want to, but I hate sanding, so I try and make it as nice as I can before baking. Here are all 3 trays out of the oven, and really they look just fine out of the oven. I think they look nice, and you could totally use them like this. But I'm going to take a couple extra steps. I'm going to clean them up a little bit and add a couple fun details. So first I'm going to pay some attention to the textured dish, and I don't know if you can see on camera, but there are a little bit of kind of fuzzies that got past me before baking, so I'm going to clean those up a little bit. The nice thing about the speckles is that you don't see any of that, so that doesn't really need much cleaning. So to clean this up, I'm going to grab some 100% acetone and put that in a little dish. And then I'm going to grab some Q-tips, and this is a great way to get any of those little fuzzies that got baked in. It can also dissolve some of the imperfections in the clay, so if there's something that's a little jagged, you can do a little bit with the acetone to kind of break that down. But if it's too much, you do want to grab some sandpaper and sand off those imperfections. Adding a sealer to your polymer clay isn't really necessary, but I wanted to add a nice gloss to the flower tray. There are a lot of sealers out there. Here I'm using Bright Tone, but feel free to use whatever you'd like. This part is pretty straightforward. I'm using a roll of tape to kind of prop my dish up just so that it's easier to handle. And I did the edges first, and then I added a coat on top. I did add a coat to the bottom later as well. I think I ended up doing 3 layers. It really depends on whatever sealer you're using. Just make sure to follow the instructions. This one you have to wait 30 minutes in between coats, but it added a nice, really high gloss finish. You could leave the speckled dish just the way it is, but I wanted to play with a fun technique with some color. So here I have some acrylic paint. You can use any acrylic paint. This just happens to be the kind that was the color that I wanted. And then I also have my bright tone sitting here. So I have a dish that I can seal up in between coats. And I'm just adding some of my bright tone to that dish. Then I took a toothpick and some of the acrylic paint, and I added just a little bit of acrylic paint to the bright tone. This is going to give the finish a kind of glossed, almost transparent finish, but with a little bit of color. When I painted this on, I just painted it to the base of the dish, and I think I ended up doing 3 or 4 coats to get it nice and even. I haven't used this technique with other sealers. I believe the sealer needs to be water-based for this to work, which Bright Tone is. So if you try it with another sealer, just make sure it's water-based. Lastly, I just wanted to add a little bit of a pop to the textured dish. So I grabbed a gold Posca pen and I just lined the edge of the dish. I ended up doing 3 coats of this, I believe, to get it nice and even. Maybe the Posca pen wasn't the best thing for this. I forgot that I had a Krylon gold marker. That probably would have been better, so I'll link to that in the description of this video. So here are all 3 dishes finished, and I absolutely love the way that they came out. They're minimalistic and just pretty. I love the details of the flower dish and how glossy it is with that finish. And then here is the speckled dish, and you can see that that sealer is just nice and translucent. I left the rest matte, so I'm really happy with the way that that came out. And then lastly, here's that textured plate. I did add a little bit of sealer on the gold trim just to protect it, but I left the rest just plain and matte, and I love how this one came out. So I hope this video inspires you to make your own dishes, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye.